Hello, and thank you for joining today's virtual update with Congresswoman Betty McCollum of Minnesota's 4th Congressional District. Our office has received many thoughtful questions you've all submitted, and Congresswoman McCollum will address many of them today. Please use your mobile device to scan our QR code here to access the statements and resources discussed today, or visit www.mccollum.house.gov/contact to get in touch. With that, I will turn it over to Congresswoman McCollum to give us an update on what's happening this week in Washington.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining me today. First, I want to just take a second to reflect on what happened a week ago and address the violence that occurred on Sunday, February 18th, that resulted in the loss of 3 Burnsville first responders' lives. Police officers Paul Elmstead, Matthew Rood, firefighter paramedic Adam Vinseth. They were murdered as they answered a call to protect 7 children. And on Wednesday, I joined along with many of you as people gathered or watched the public memorial service for these courageous men who dedicated their lives to protecting others. Their deaths in the line of duty, they're a tragedy that touches their families, their fellow first responders, the Burnsville community, Minnesota, and yes, our entire nation. Their sacrifice must be remembered and honored. So it was with a heavy heart that I returned to Washington this week. And with Minnesota's representatives, led by Congresswoman Angie Craig, who represents the Burnsville area, we gathered on the House floor. And together, our nation honored these heroes with a moment of silence. Now, I'm going to share with you an update about what we did in Congress lately. But first, before I go into that, some of you noticed I'm wearing my glasses. I've got some water next to me. It's allergy season in Washington, D.C. The daffodils outside of the area I stay in are up, popping out of the ground, and we just found out that the cherry blossom forecast is out for the end of March. So bear with me if I have to get a drink of water, please. So what happened this week? Well, it was the week in which Congress passed the 4th continuing resolution for the fiscal year that began 5 months ago. Now, if Congress wouldn't have taken action by today, half of our government agencies would have shut down. Food inspections by the USDA would have been disrupted. Veterans career counseling services would have ceased. And the other half of our government would have shut down a week later, delaying the rollout of student aid offers for those enrolling this fall and halting the pay for our active duty service members. So we avoided that happening by passing our 4th CR. And I voted to keep our federal government open for business and delivering for our communities to the American people. But let's be clear, Congress is almost half a year late on passing the fiscal year 2024 funding. And that's especially disappointing that this fiscal chaos has gone on for so long because, let's face it, it's completely avoidable. We find ourselves in this chaotic situation because the House Republican majority refuses to accept the fact that we are a divided government, and bipartisanship is the only path forward. In June, almost 9 months ago, President Biden signed into law the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Now, that passed the House with the support of both Democrats and Republicans. And even though I wasn't, happy with the budget, it's not the one I would have written, I voted for it. I voted to keep the full faith and credit of the United States intact and to provide a path to get the appropriations bills done on time last September. Now, these are compromises that responsible legislators should make to fulfill our basic responsibility to you, the American people. But here we are, almost 5 months past those deadlines. And instead of working with Democrats to craft a responsible funding bills passed on the bipartisan bill, the Republicans in turn decided to push their extreme bipartisan legislation. They cut funding more than $150 billion below the agreed upon levels. taking away food assistance for just a couple examples from hundreds of thousands of new parents and young children by underfunding WIC, and cutting housing assistance vouchers for 40,000 families, to mention only a few consequences of what families would have been facing in the 4th District in Minnesota. But they also added policy writers attacking everything from women's reproductive rights to Minnesota's Boundary Waters Wilderness Area, putting all of those in jeopardy. Appropriation bills, they are about funding the federal commitments, but instead they became a divisive wish list for MAGA policies. Republican House leaders have known all along that these divisive bills had no chance of passing in the Senate or ever being signed into law. What they were more interested in was partisan politics than governing. We put people first in our caucus. So Democrats have stepped forward to prevent the shutdown on 4 occasions. Now, Republican and Democratic leaders are saying that they've come to an agreement, and I'm glad that they have, and that we might see a bipartisan text of what they've agreed upon as the New Deal as early as this weekend. I sure hope so, and I hope it will bring a clean bipartisan funding bill up for a vote to meet our fundamental responsibility to fund the government. I want to thank so many of you for participating in and asking questions. And as we don't have time to ask all the questions, the staff gathers them together and we focus on the ones that we've had the most questions on. So one of the topics that continues to come up over and over and over again is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, right followed after what is happening in Ukraine. For those of you who had other questions on other topics, now you're going to receive an email response from me by the end of next week. Well, as I said, it's no surprise that many of you submitted questions about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. In fact, just yesterday, we witnessed more than 100 Palestinian civilians that were killed in Gaza City, with hundreds injured, as residents, as parents tried to reach a convoy of trucks carrying humanitarian aid. I want you to know, I support the United Nations conducting a full investigation as to what happened. Israel has made itself responsible for delivering the aid safely to children and families, and we must know what happened. But I do want to take a moment to commend the United Kingdom and France. They've been working with Jordan to airdrop aid into Gaza. And I know that the Biden administration is also developing a plan for American aid to be dropped as well. And I'll be following closely the Biden administration to make this happen as soon as possible. We know the situation is desperate, and we all know we need to do more. The death toll in Gaza has now surpassed 30,000 people. And I have been calling for a regional ceasefire since last October. Why a regional ceasefire? It's the only plan that will guarantee a chance for lasting peace. A regional ceasefire will keep the war from spreading between Lebanon, and it will also, I believe, facilitate the return of hostages. It will allow for more food, more water, and more fuel to reach the civilians in Gaza. And I want you to know that I am constantly pressing the Biden administration at every opportunity to do more for Palestinian civilians and to stop the war. Here's just one example of something that I worked on with Representative Barbara Lee of California. I'm the ranking Democrat on defense, and she's the ranking member for state and foreign ops appropriations. We asked the president not to allow the transfer of small arms to the Israeli government, where they could be placed in the hands of violent extremist settlers in the West Bank, and we were successful. The bottom line is we need to continue to work to end the violence, and more aid needs to get into Gaza as swiftly as possible. Now, for Ukraine, it's also important and urgent that we get more aid into Ukraine. Last week was the second anniversary of Vladimir Putin's illegal and unjust invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian people have shown incredible resolve in repelling Russia's overwhelming military force. But let's be clear, Putin is a dictator and he is a war criminal. His military has murdered thousands of Ukrainian civilians, kidnapped children, and has used rape and torture as tools of war. 2 weeks ago, Putin murdered his Russian political opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. As the world's leading democracy, the United States, we have a moral obligation and duty to stand with our allies and lend a hand to fellow democracies in their time of need. What happens in Ukraine also impacts our own national security. Putin's goal is to reclaim Ukraine, to end democracy there, along with fracturing the alliance of the democracies in Europe. If he succeeds, the Russian military will be directly on the border of our NATO allies. I had the opportunity to recently meet with parliamentarians from the Baltic states and Romania, who shared their fears with me of this exact scenario. Simply put, if we don't continue to stand with Ukraine, Putin will continue his aggression, seizing more and more territory in Europe. And then we will be looking at deploying U.S. troops to Europe to honor our NATO commitment and to protect our fellow democracies. European democracies have always been tied directly to our own, and that's why we cannot let Putin win in Ukraine. President Biden knows this, Democrats in Congress know this, and many, many of my Republicans do. The vote was given a chance for Ukrainian assistance, it would pass overwhelmingly. And that's why over the last 2 years, the United States has provided financial assistance to Ukraine to support their military, their government, and their humanitarian relief efforts. And Europe and NATO have been doing the same thing. This has been a shared response among allies and democracies. But let's face it, we know that Ukraine is now at a tipping point, and the Ukrainians have fought valiantly. But now their military is running short of ammunition, air defense systems, and other critical supplies. The European Union has stepped up again and again, and recently agreed to send another $50 billion in support. Now it's time for the U.S. to do our part. And that's why I support the National Security Act of 2024. This bipartisan legislation overwhelmingly passed the Senate 2 weeks ago, and it contains a robust security assistance for Ukraine. And it also contains $9 billion urgently needed humanitarian assistance, not only for Ukraine, but for Gaza and the West Bank too. But for Ukraine, this type of assistance is critical to supporting the Ukrainian economy, which also helps the international economy. Let me tell you why. When we help Ukraine, Ukraine is able to ship more grain from their ports, and this food is desperately needed by families in Africa and in the Middle East. So we can't afford to delay the security package any longer. President Biden sent this security supplemental request to Congress last October, 4 months ago. And for 4 months, the Republicans in Congress have failed to act. You have to wonder why. Is it because a majority of Republicans in Congress agree with Donald Trump? You must be asking yourselves, I know I am, why does Trump give shout outs to dictators like Putin? The answer is because the former president wants to appease Putin at every turn. Just last week, Trump again sang the praises of Russia by implying that Russia alone defeated Nazi Germany and ignoring the sacrifices of the US and Western Allied forces in World War II, where so many lives were lost and so many wounded and injured. And now it appeals that there's Republicans in Congress who want to appease Putin too. I have to tell you, this is outrageous and it needs to stop. The Speaker must put the Senate bipartisan security supplemental on the floor immediately for a vote, and it will pass overwhelmingly. Well, the world appears to be on fire at times, and the news is hard to watch. And there are so many crises we are confronting on the global and federal stages. But I want you to know, I'm also doing work that's close to us here at home. And some of it is, I think, uplifting and things that we can be proud that we're working on. The piece of legislation that I'm referring to has to do with the Mississippi River. So during my last visual update, I gave you a tease. I told you I'd be reintroducing my legislation to revitalize the Mississippi River and all the communities that rely upon it. The mighty Mississippi is a national icon, and we're proud to be the stewards of the headwaters of the Mississippi. This great river supports the economy, recreation, culture, and environment, along with the well-being of communities, and it runs through our nation as a whole. On February 7th, I reintroduced the Mississippi River Restoration Resilience Initiative Act. And we're just calling it MARY. With the co-leadership of our neighbor to the east, Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin. We are proud that we're working together as a team to protect and restore this river. So Mary's goals are simple and they're easy and they're things we can all agree with, like improving water quality, restoring wildlife habitat, stopping the spread of aquatic invasive species like Asian carp, and building community resilience to flooding and storms. We already have a program like this for our Great Lakes, which funds projects to clean up and revitalize those waters, and they're a huge success. We see it in our own Lake Superior. We need the same investments and opportunities along with the Mississippi corridor. MARY will create new grant opportunities and fund community-driven projects with dedicated investments for those who have borne the highest cost in environmental degradation. For example, we've been working with tribal leaders, and we're going to set 5% of the funding for projects that will be led by tribal governments and tribal organizations. Now, many of you know I grew up on the river in South St. Paul. And when I was younger, the Mississippi was primarily a working industrial river, and it was polluted. Now, years later, as a member of Congress, I paddled through the Twin Cities in a canoe on the Mississippi and have watched eagles fishing and perching along the river shores. And that was unthinkable when I was a child. No one went down to the river. Now today, the Mississippi River is a source of drinking water for more than 20 million Americans and a place for families to enjoy. The river serves as a flyaway for migratory birds and key habitat for native fish. And it's doing so at a time when America's wildlife is in decline and is in desperate need of support. And the Mississippi continues to be a critical source of jobs and economic growth. We see that with the barges. The waterway of this importance to our national interest deserves a focused, coordinated investment at the federal level. A lot of progress has been made, but decades of pollution and new challenges mean there's a lot more work to do. With increased flooding, devastating drought, and other severe weather events due to climate change, communities need to support in order to ensure resilience amidst these storms and their impacts. So working together alongside states, counties, local governments, and others who love the Mississippi River, our coordinated federal effort will promote the resilience of this vital historic waterway. This great river is the heartbeat of our nation, and with important cultural keystones, which we all have a connection to. And it reminds us who we are and what we value. So once again, I am excited, as I'm sure you can tell, and proud to reintroduce this legislation, and now to have my partner, Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin. Together, working with you, we will keep the mighty Mississippi mighty for the next generation. Now, I had the opportunity to be back home for quite a few days last month. I guess we're getting ready to say goodbye to February and leap year. So what was I up to? Well, I got the opportunity to meet with mayors from across the district to hear about community priorities and the areas where we can partner on behalf of our shared constituents. And I had the opportunity of meeting with she's been there for a while, but I just got to meet Beth Richardson, the Canadian Consul General. She's magnificent, and we're excited about working together to strengthen our country's ties. Leaders from St. Paul Historic Rondo neighborhood. Well, I got to meet with them to discuss the efforts to revitalize and to continue to work to make this community vibrant and thriving, not only for today, but for future generations. And then I got to go to the Minnesota State Capitol and met with many, many people who are together rallying support for the Equal Rights Amendment, standing together to affirm women's basic fundamental rights. And the way that we protect those is by guaranteeing them in the United States Constitution. And then our fabulous East Metro legislators, we talked about how we can pair together to work on transportation and how we can work together on housing and so many other things that have a federal and a state component, as well as a local government role in it too. There are new sessions underway, and I look forward to working with them to make sure that we are successful as we can be for our communities back home. The other thing that I've been following up on is since 2022, I've been working to bring community-funded projects back to the 4th District. And that is something that I reach out to the community, local units of government, our great nonprofits, and say, how can the federal government partner for something that's really important to our community to make our community stronger? One example is Plaza del Sol, which recently broke ground on its revitalization building on St. Paul's East Side. This is a fabulous project. This project will support Latino small businesses. It was an honor to partner with them to secure $1 million in federal funding. I look forward to the transformative impact this economic hub is going to have for years to come, the difference it's going to make to small businesses, and the vibrance it's going to bring to our communities to enjoy everything from food to arts in the area. Now, there's other projects that we're working on throughout the year. I talked to principals and school counselors about 3 of them just last week. There's the annual arts competition, which we're kicking off right now. Each spring, the U.S. House of Representatives sponsors a nationwide competition to recognize artistic talent. The competition's open to all high school students attending school or living in the 4th Congressional District, including homeschoolers. This art will be featured at the Schmidt Artist Loft during the spring St. Paul Art Crawl. And I want to thank Springborns for the Arts, the St. Paul Art Crawl, and the Schmidt artists for allowing our high school students to display their art in an artist gallery. And they help hang it up too. It is a fantastic opportunity. If you go to the art crawl, look on the map and go to Schmidt Artistics Loft, where you will see amazing art. Now, we do have to judge it. It's all great, but I have professional artistic judges judge the art. The first place winner is displayed in the U.S. Capitol. The second place winner is displayed in my Washington, D.C. office in the front office when you walk in. And the third place winner, well, it's in the St. Paul office. And the oohs and ahs that last year's winner received, well, it was just something when people turned and said, where did you get this great piece of art from? And we said, it's one of our high school students' art. So if you're interested, the submissions are April 12th. You can mail them in, drop them off to my St. Paul office. And if you're a high school student, check with your art teacher. They usually collect and we work directly with them. So there's guidelines and forms available on my website. The other things that you'll find on my website for high school students to participate in and junior high school students is the app challenge. And we also sponsor and host people to apply for the U.S. Military Academy. So if you have a young student in your life or know someone who might look for an opportunity to, do something at a federal level through our office, please have them contact our office. Now, speaking of working, my casework team in Minnesota at the district office, they are busy all the time assisting constituents experiencing issues with any federal agency, including the IRS, Social Security, the United States Post Office, and the State Department for immigration or passport issues, and so much more. This is my opportunity to remind you, check that passport. You want to have 6 months left on it. Please, 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 if you're close to 6 months, call us immediately. We'll help you so that your travel can go smoothly. Another thing I want to remind you about is tax season is underway. And this is a reminder to be vigilant with your personal information. You need to avoid tax scams and cybersecurity threats. If someone's reaching out to you saying that they're the IRS or that they're a bank or that they need more information, be very careful. If you have any questions about that at all, contact your bank. Go to the Social Security website, the official one. Go onto Google and click it on yourself or call our office. I want you to be careful out there. We're seeing far too many people having their information stolen. And that's legislation that we are working on in Congress as well. I want you to know that I'll continue to remain committed to serving you, the people of the 4th District. It's a great honor to do so. I want to thank those of you who submitted questions, those of you who have joined us on and off as we do this update from Washington. And once again, do not hesitate to reach out to my office in St. Paul or Washington. If you want to meet with me as a group, we try to meet with as many people when they're in Washington, but here I do not control my time. So we, meet with people in Minnesota as well. So as I go back and forth, please know that I do so trying to get our work done on time and making sure that our community moves forward so that we can be strong together. So thank you so much for joining us today. Take care, travel safe, and get ready for allergy season. I hope my voice hasn't been too rough. So all the best. Thank you. And goodbye.
Thanks again for joining us today. Please stay in touch by scanning the QR code to get signed up for our e-newsletter or give us a call at one of our offices. Have a great day.